This is Jerry Mintz, and I guess we're live now. This is only the second webinar that we've done, and so there are bound to be some glitches, but we'll do the best we can. Nevertheless, last year when we did a webinar, by the time we were done with it, the course was full. We have only 25 locations. I say locations because it can be an individual or a group, and if you sign up for the online course, we can have up to 5 people become part of it and participate in it for the same tuition. But tonight we're going to talk about the things that we know about starting schools. And of course, we know we've started about 100, but we also know that there are many others out there that didn't necessarily use our services directly, but they managed to get their school started. They were able to use information that we, from our website or from conferences and so on. And so maybe this will be all you need to get going, who knows. But we've discovered that when people actually take the course, they have much better chance of actually getting something started. We've got over 80 people that have signed up for the webinar specifically, and there may be more joining us, but the people who have actually signed up and sent in information, of course, we'll be communicating to you, and you'll have, of course, the first choice for getting into the course. And we have a lot of really interesting questions. I've tried to kind of divide them up into general areas of interest. The first, we're going to be going through some basic information about school starting, and I've got some slides to go through to show you with some examples of some of these things. This year, we're actually going to try to do a bit of video and see if that works. You can ask live questions, and in fact, we would love it if you send feedback in, even that you're receiving this. Make sure that we know we're getting out there. So this is actually the 11th year or 12th, I've lost track, that we've been doing the School Starter course. And it's a lot of work for us, and it's not a great investment for people, but it is an investment. And of course, they can make it up with the tuition from the first student if they have an independent school. Which reminds me, we do have people who start public alternatives, and we're fine with that. We like it when when you want to start any kind of a learner-centered alternative, because that to us is what we think will be the thing that gets the education revolution going. And that, of course, is Arrow's mission. It's the education revolution, to make learner-centered education possible for students or for people everywhere. I'm going to start with this. Let's see how I do this. I guess I'm going to try to share the screen with you. Let's see how I do that. Okay. No? No? Let's see. And let's see if this works. Okay. Now I'm going to go here, and let's see if this works. Okay. I've got Wiley here, who's a staff member at Arrow. So Wiley, is this the way we want it to look?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So that is a picture of a woman that I met when she was 96 years old. This is Nelly Dick. And she was a teacher at the Modern School. She was born in Ukraine in the 1800s. And that's her husband, Jim. And she actually, when she was 13 years old, started a Sunday school in England, and she called it the Socialist, Anarchist, Communist Sunday School. At that point, there was sort of not much differentiation between them. And so she came to the United States and got involved with something called the Modern School Movement, which was started by Francisco Ferrer in Spain. And there was a modern school in New York City, and then it moved to Stelton, New Jersey. And it was a democratic program, democratic school. It became actually a community. And so this movement goes back pretty far. That actually goes back to, I think, 1911, when that particular school was started. And of course, some of you have heard of Summerhill School in England, and that goes back to 1921. And I just recently visited Summerhill this year. And I usually go when I'm on my way anywhere. Later on, I'll tell you a little bit about a trip that I just took that went to England and then to the International Democratic Education Conference in Finland. And then after that, to an orphanage in Nepal that we helped to support. This is taken from one of the schools that we helped to start. This is Brooklyn Free School, and this is taken in one of the earlier years. And I think in that particular picture, we were taking them on a trip to visit another school that we started in New Jersey. And I remember on my way over there thinking at one point, they wanted me to demonstrate the democratic process. And I realized, hey, the oldest kid there is 5 years old. And so I wondered, and this is something, by the way, that you all have to fight in yourselves as you start learner-centered schools, because something inside of us tells us, oh no, this is not going to work. Because our training was, for the most part, not in democratic schools, not in learner-centered schools. And so I went over there and I thought, oh my goodness, this is not going to work. And then the kids got around a table, and I told them, okay, there's two main reasons why you would have a democratic meeting. One is if you have an idea that's good for the school, and another one is if you have an idea about a problem in the school. All the hands went up. And in fact, a 4.5-year-old said that she heard that chocolate had a caffeine-like substance in it, and that maybe kids should only have it in the mornings so it wouldn't keep them up or whatever. And that was passed by the meeting. So I discovered, of course, that my fears were groundless and that kids under 5 can participate in a democratic meeting. This was, again, in the early years of Brooklyn Free School, which is now in its 12th year. And this is when they were in a church, and this was at one of their graduations. And we'll talk later on about the idea that sometimes it's a good way to start a school in a church. These were a couple of students that went on a trip to visit Albanese Free School, which is another school that goes back to the early 70s. And this is again at the graduation. This is Albany Free School when we went there to visit them, and they're now about 40 years old, more than 40. And that's a school that it's interesting when we talk about finances. We'll get to this, but Albany Free School is supported to a certain extent by having fixed up a bunch of inner city buildings and rented them out. And the rent is in the form of donations, which keep the school going and allow them to have a very sliding scale tuition. This is back to Brooklyn Free School, and kids are using an interesting game that you can control that ball there with your mind. So that, I found that very interesting. This is again at the graduation, and this is at a different building, because what we did at Brooklyn is we eventually were able to buy, or they were able to buy, a building for $1.7 million after 6 years of operating in that church, and that's where they are now. It's a 5-story building in Clinton Hill area of Brooklyn, and they're at 80 students. They started at 35 students. They've got 80 students now from kindergarten through graduation, high school graduation. This is at a meeting at Brooklyn Free School, again back to the graduation, and This is the founders group of Brooklyn Free School, and these were, a lot of them were parents, other people that have been involved with the school all that time. This was at the 10th anniversary. This is another school that was a spin-off of Brooklyn Free School because it had a waiting list. And so because it had a waiting list, Alan Berger, who was the original director, and I felt that we didn't like that idea. And so we encouraged people in Manhattan to go ahead and start a school there, which was called Manhattan Free School. But it has evolved into what is now called Agile Learning Center. And this man in the picture there was one of the people, because his background was in software, and so who brought the idea of Agile learning to the table. And now there are Agile Learning Centers starting all over the world. It's quite an incredible thing to see how a little school that just started with a handful of kids could begin to have that kind of influence. This is a school, or actually a homeschool resource center in England that we helped to start, called A Place to Grow. And it's now been going for several years. They started out in those yurts up there and so on, and now they have their own building. And this was in one of the yurts. And then this is a phenomenon, of course, that's all over the world. So I visited one of the 200 or so illegal democratic schools in Korea at the International Democratic Education Conference that we had in Korea. And these kids went to one of those schools there. And this is quite an interesting thing. And at that point, the government decided, somebody in the government decided to see if they could rein in those schools or try to get them closed. So they decided they were going to try to start regulating them. And I was part of a group of people that were involved with a protest on the streets of Seoul, and it was covered by the media, and that was enough to stop them. They don't like that kind of attention. And so now, 2 or 3 years later, these schools are still doing okay. And of course, the reason why there are so many democratic schools that are starting in Korea is because their basic system is so rigid. And of course, this is a worldwide problem. This is a woman who is from China. She's Arrow's representative in China and is working on starting alternative schools in China. These kids were at an Arrow conference. We have a conference every year. This year it was in Portland, Oregon. And then we've also been back in New York for the 3 years before that. This was somebody at the conference. On the person on the right there is one of the founders of North Star School, which is not a school, sorry, North Star, which is a homeschool resource center, which has about 80 kids that come in, and they really come in when and if they want to. But I think one of the things they kind of advertise is that this could be the last day, your last day of school, and then from then on, these kids become independent learners, and those students have been very, very impressive to meet. This was at last year's conference. This is Sugata Mitra, who was a keynote speaker. And Sugata Mitra, you probably heard about his hole-in-the-wall experiment, where he put a computer in a wall in a slum area in India, and just to see what would happen. And the students there, they just kind of started gathering around it, teaching themselves how to use the computer. They'd never seen anything like it before. Teaching themselves English in order to be able to understand some of it. And a few months later, we're totally conversant with it. And so Sugata Mitra was a speaker, a keynoter at our conference, and has continued to do these kind of experiments, and very successful, very eye-opening for people. He's actually a professor in England, and we were very lucky to have him. And here he is sitting with a group of people from that conference a year ago. And here he is talking to Yaakov Hecht. Yaakov was in Korea at that particular point. Actually, if you look at the picture, you'll understand. Sugata complained that Yaakov was 10 times bigger than him. But Yaakov actually has helped start over 25 democratic public schools in Israel. And every year there is an International Democratic Education Conference. The first one he organized in Israel in 1993, and I was there. There were just a handful of us for a very short meeting. Now we have them every year in a different country. So last year we had one in Finland, which I went to, and I was a speaker. And this coming year it's going to be back in Israel. And it's going to be at the Hadera School, which he helped to found. Or he did found. This is one of the breakout sessions at that conference a year ago, and some of the students that came to the conference. This is something entirely different. This is a meeting that was organized by one of the Aero representatives in California, in San Jose. And the idea of it was to introduce parents to what their choices were. Quite an amazing thing, very good turnout, and he now does it every year. That was a couple of years ago. He's done it a couple of times since. And we love to see this happening. We have over 100 representatives. And we love to see people organize things in the area to let people know what the alternatives are. Because a lot of times parents don't realize they have choices. They don't realize they can homeschool. They don't realize that there are alternative schools almost everywhere, or that they could even start one. This was taken at an International Democratic Education Conference that was in Colorado, Boulder, Colorado. And this is the Patchwork School, which is an Aero member school that we visited as part of the conference. And here, this is another. See, this again. These things are happening everywhere. This was at Montreal, where there was a huge, I mean, kind of amazingly big, several hundred people for a homeschool conference organized by our representative up there. And it's interesting because it's not really legal in Quebec, and yet it's happening. And so it's happening to such an extent that the government doesn't quite know what to do about it. And it's growing fast. And this is happening in a lot of places. This is what actually happened with the homeschool movement in the United States. It got so big that it got to a point where it just couldn't be controlled. And I think that's amazing. It's had a very powerful influence. These were some of the people that were at that conference. Here is a picture that was taken at Mosaic School, which is now an Agile Learning Center, and was started by Nancy Tilton in North Carolina. I remember when she came into the course, she was one of our school starters, and a parent had come to her and had a couple of kids, and so she just thought she would take this course because she was going to work with those couple of kids and wanted to kind of understand a little bit more about what she could do. And what happened is that wound up morphing into such a big school that she actually had to break it up into 2 different schools, which she now runs in Charlotte, North Carolina. These are pictures taken from those schools. This is another Aero member school. This is called Pono. And Pono is in Manhattan. And it is, I think, technically a homeschool resource center. I've been going now for several years in a beautiful location right next to a park. These are some of the kids in their location. And what I'm going to try to do now is show you a little bit of the video. This is an experiment for us, so we'll see if it's going to work. And I don't know how well you'll be able to see it. Give you a little snatch of what it's like inside one of our schools. And you can see it's hardly anything like a regular traditional school. And yet you can see all kinds of things going on. Look at that kid on the floor just sitting there reading while everything is going on around him. Quite interesting. And then there's a student who's going to go over and take a look at the aquarium and see what's going on in there. So yeah, let us know if you were able to see this. We might try to do it again. This year's Aero Conference was in Portland, Oregon. And this is Young Zhao, who is a very famous speaker who's from China and speaks all over the world now, and very much of a critic of the Chinese system and the American system. In fact, it's interesting. One of the first things he said was, why do you call it alternative education? You should call yourselves the real education. And that's kind of an interesting point, isn't it? He said that his own education in China was kind of alternative, but not by design. It's just because they had very little in the way of resources, so they kind of had to be pretty innovative. So, and we have his talk available. It's possible to get, if you go to the Aero website, you can actually get the video of his talk, and it was an amazing keynote. And another keynote speaker there was Peter Gray. And Peter Gray is quite an expert on, he's an anthropologist, and his background, he talked about kind of the evolution of education and the education system over going back to caveman days, really, going back to the agrarian culture, and before that to the hunter-gatherers, and how things changed and what the natural things are. It was quite, again, quite an incredible talk. And he is also very involved with learner-centered approaches. He's starting a new organization to encourage self-learning and so on, and home education and unschooling. And is also quite an expert on Sudbury Valley School, because his son is a teacher there. Speaking of homeschooling, this is the table for the Village Home, which actually did a presentation. It had a student panel at the Aero Conference. And here they are at the Aero Conference, and there are hundreds of kids in this program, and it's actually part of the public school system. Very interesting. This they are able to do in Oregon, even though all the people are homeschooling. This is a picture that was taken at an Aero regional conference. And Peter Gray is actually going to be coming to this conference as a speaker. This is going to be at the end of this month, the 30th through the 2nd of October, and that's going to be in Massachusetts. So if anybody's able to get there, they should come. It's an off-the-grid location. It's quite an amazing place called Earthlands. And so we still have room for people to sign up for that. So Peter Gray is going to be one of the speakers, and we have other workshops that are coming that look pretty interesting. So if you happen to miss this year's conference, or if you want to get more of it, come to the regional in Massachusetts. This was a woman who was in her 80s, and she was one of the mini talk people at the Aero Conference this year, and she talked about the travels that she has just made around the country, because she wanted to see what kind of alternatives there were going on around the country. And her orientation is to try to see what she can do for the public schools. And she wants to see these changes applied to the public schools. She was in our School Starters course last year, again, not because she was necessarily going to start a school, but because she wanted to help people who wanted to start new learner-centered programs. This was another speaker that we had this year. This is Stuart Grauer, who actually started a little school in San Diego. It's now grown into a pretty good-sized school, and many, many years later, and he now goes all over the world and is a speaker. And we just published a book of his that is called Fearless Teaching. And it's an amazing book about some of the kinds of unusual experiences that he's had watching teachers in various parts of the world. Speaking of traveling around the world, as I said, I went this year to England and then to Finland and then to the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Orphanage in Nepal, which we've been helping to support, but I'd never been there before. I'd run into students at the ashram, from the ashram, from the orphanage at Aero conferences, because we were sometimes able to arrange funding to get them and the teachers to come to Aero conferences, to IDEC conferences. But this is the first time that I got a chance to actually see them. And it was an eye-opening experience. It's amazing. They have a number of very substantial buildings. Unfortunately, some of them were fairly damaged by the earthquake that just hit there. But one of the things is they took 30 new orphans in there. Nobody pays for these kids. 110 kids that they take care of with their staff. And then they have another location with over 60. So they're in a beautiful location on the outskirts of Kathmandu. That is Ramchandra, who started the orphanage. And it's interesting, he ran away from home when he was 12 years old, came back 20 years later after educating himself in India and finding out about Sri Aurobindo, who is sort of like the Indian John Dewey, and saw the poverty when he came back to Nepal and decided to start this orphanage just with a couple of people. And now they've got 3 locations. The third one is going to be for trekkers. They are 70% self-supporting, and the trekker location is going to actually support the orphanage. They also have dairies in 2 of their locations. One is in the southern part of the country where they raise a lot of their own food, but on this location, which is only 2.5 acres, they use every square inch of it for agriculture too. And they're actually able to have enough milk that they can sell an excess to Kathmandu. Again, another way that they support the ashram. And so this is Ramchandra, the founder, with some of the kids there. The boy in the middle, I actually met when he was young at one of the Aero conferences. He's grown up, gone through university, and now is a teacher at the school. And those are some of the kids that are in his class. And he actually runs his class democratically. I'm going to try another video here and see if we can get this to work. I don't know if we got any feedback from anybody that it was working. And that is another person I met as a student in 2003. He now has his master's degree in physics from Germany and has come back there as a teacher.
This is Gadananda, who actually, when he was 12 years old, spent 3 months after the IDEC.
Right, quite amazing. So these are some of the kids working out in the garden, and the kids all help out with all of that. And this is actually a woman who graduated from the school and became a professional dancer, and she's performed all over the world. And there are a number of stories like that. So a year and a half ago, I went to Colombia. They invited me to be a speaker there, and I was very excited about it because of the language barrier, we don't know a lot about the alternatives that are going on in South America. So this was in Bogota, Colombia, and these were some of the people who came to that conference. There's actually an awful lot going on. In fact, there's a lot going on all over the world, in places which you might be surprised about. For example, last year, we had several people who were from Arab countries join the School Starters course. And so this was in Bogota. And after the conference, I got a chance to visit a school that we helped to start, Calapa School. And it's on the outskirts of Bogota in a beautiful location. Let's look at that, it's incredible. And the people who started it had come to 2 Aero conferences and got as much information as they could. They also visited a couple of Aero schools, the Agile Learning Center and Pono, got ideas from them, which they then applied. And this is a founders group of Calapa in Colombia. Those are some of the kids that were there that day. This is something that they learned from the schools, from the Agile Learning Center. And this is at a parents' meeting that we had. And that is basically what we got from the slides. I'm going to see if I can get back to, let's see where this is. How do I get back to?
Stop.
Huh?
At the top of your bottom screen, stop.
Oh, stop. That's what I need to do. And let's see if I come back. Oh, there I am. Okay. So let's see how we're doing time-wise. Yeah, I think we're doing okay. So I'm going to start reading some of the questions that people have sent in here, and I'll try to respond to some of them. And you can still send in new ones. Have we got any new ones yet, Wiley?
Check.
He's going to check and see. So you can still send in questions. So basically these were in kind of 3 different categories: finance, logistics, and things that were kind of local to the different people's situations. So I'm going to start reading some of these. You can see some of the financial ones. How does one get financing for a school? Here's one. Can you go over some unconventional recruiting advertising tactics you've observed that have had good outcomes? What are some popular tactics that seem to be poor investments? Also, please discuss online advertising versus print versus word of mouth, etc. Well, you know, in terms of some things that are unusual, first of all, one of the things I saw that was very interesting that one school did last year is they offered 2 free scholarships with a lottery in Philadelphia. This was Philly Free School. And this was so successful, they've repeated it a couple of times because it got a lot of attention for the school, drew a lot of people to the school, and then some people enrolled anyway, even if they didn't win the lottery. So again, this is, I thought, a very creative thing that they came up with. Something else that I found was very useful is bingo. And one of our graduates of the school I ran for many years decided to start a bingo to support us. Now, bingo is legal just about everywhere. And there's no reason why the Catholic schools have to be the only ones that can make money on it. There's no reason why you can't do it with your school. You need to check your local laws, but usually if you're a nonprofit, that is good enough for you to host a bingo. We made about $100,000 over a couple of years' time on ours. And I also became a licensed auctioneer, again, as a way of raising money for the school. So in other words, sometimes you need to come up with ways that you can raise significant amounts of money, not bake sales, which doesn't do a whole lot. But auctions are good, bingo is good, and having a gala is also good. And the Brooklyn Free School does this every year, and they make something like $10,000 to $15,000 on that. And you can also do mailings you develop a mailing list. Anybody who expresses interest in your school or program, you add them to a mailing list and build that up, and then periodically send out fundraising requests to them. And of course, now you've got other kinds of things, crowdfunding and so on. So here's another question. Can you expect to run a school on only tuition? Well, there are a lot of schools that do that, but I personally don't like it that much. I like to have other kinds of fundraising involved, and also we advocate having a sliding scale for tuition, meaning that you charge families according to their income. And there are organizations, and we talk about this in the course, that actually will do this for you, that they will look at a parent's income and recommend the amount that family should be paying. And they can also be the ones who collect it too. So these are things, again, which we can tell you about in the course. Can democratic education be made available to families on very low income? Well, of course, we talked already about sliding scale, and a lot of the schools that we're involved with, I know that for Brooklyn and Manhattan, the Agile Learning Center, probably half the students there are minority. And so, and low income, a lot are low income. And so it can be done. And 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 there's still enough for teachers to live on and to live properly. So, but again, also supplementing this with other sorts of fundraising is useful. One of the things I just will mention at this point is people think, oh, I want to find an angel who's gonna subsidize us. Well, usually it's a double-edged sword. If somebody is funding you, or if you get a big grant for that matter, they either will try to control you, or when that funding goes away, you close. So I don't necessarily recommend that as the best way to do things. Let's see. How much money do you recommend having in place before a program begins? Well, when we were starting Brooklyn Free School, we actually started raising money a year before we had any location, but we were having meetings every couple of weeks in a different apartment. And so I think you'd start building that up and you can do fundraisers. And this is the way that can work. Let's see. How do you go about ensuring financial aid in small independent schools? You know, I didn't mention this, but Stuart Grauer is somebody who organized a small schools organization. And if people are interested, I can put them in touch with him, who may have some answers for this. We have other questions here, logistical questions. For example, let's see. How long does it take to start a school? Well, the answer is there are people who've taken the School Starters course, and I didn't hear from them for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And all of a sudden, I would hear from them again, oh, something came along, it worked out, and I started my school. It sometimes takes a while for this to percolate. On the other hand, our turnaround from the time that we came back from the IDEC in 2003, and people were saying, gee, you know, there are no Democratic schools in New York City. We should do something about that. And we had meetings and committees. Brooklyn Free School started that next year. And now there are a bunch of them in the Manhattan or in the New York City area. There's something in Queens, there's something in Manhattan, 2 or 3 of them, 4 of them. In Brooklyn, there's a bunch of things starting, even in right across the river in New Jersey. So it can be quick or it can be slow. It really varies. What are the essential roles for a startup team, and how can you attract these people on your team? Well, this is a very important question. I know of one school that started, and the people just sort of took literally, I would almost say, anybody off the street. That was a problem. You really need to have people who are on the same page with you. I think you can't just take people for financial reasons, and that includes students too. I do think you have to be careful about that in the beginning. What are common problems or pitfalls you've seen with small Democratic and Sudbury schools? Well, one of the things that I would say is that there's kind of a spectrum, a philosophical spectrum of how the Democratic education works in different schools. For example, at Sudbury Valley School, they do not want teachers to offer classes. They want the students to come up with the ideas first, and then if they ask for classes, they can be given. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got Summerhill School in England, for example, that has a timetable of classes that happen every day. The kids know about it. They actually can ask for certain subjects to be offered. And then the kids are under no pressure to go to them, and they very often don't. So that's the other end of the scale. And in the middle is kind of what we tend to advocate, which is that staff can offer classes. There should be no pressure to go. They do not have to be in a certain subject area. We liked the idea that a staff would maybe offer something in an area that they didn't know anything about, because one of the most important things to learn is how to learn. And that is something that you can do along with the teacher. So there is this kind of spectrum of the ways that democratic education is offered. But as far as I'm concerned, in the end, I think the kids come out pretty well in any of those approaches. Let's see. How does democratic education work across a school? Well, as I said, I've demonstrated democratic process in various situations, and I've also demonstrated it and even used it in non-school situations. A class can have a democratic process. That can work fine. Even a club can have it, some kind of a club outside of a school. So I've had experiences with this, and I've been very amazed at the power of democratic process in that situation. So one thing that's interesting, though, is that at my school we did not run staff meetings as a democracy. I think we went more, we never talked about it as such, but it was more like what you would call consensus. We would discuss things and come to agreements on them, and I think you would hopefully expect this with a staff, that they'd all be pretty much on the same page, and it wouldn't be that necessary to vote on things. Is this course relevant to starting a school in the UK, specifically England? Also, is it relevant to Australia? Who recognizes this course as a valid qualification to start a school? Well, in every country, in every state, there are different laws. Part of the course is you need to become conversant with the laws in your own state or country, because they're all different. There's no way that we could know what they all are. We can suggest things, but that's very important. And we've helped people start schools all over the world, so that is certainly has worked well. As you were asking specifically about England in this question, of course, we've helped start some things in England, and they've worked fine. In England right now, homeschooling is very easy, and that is one way to go. But there are other approaches, and there are some other alternative schools in England. One thing that's interesting is England kind of ripped us off by calling some of what they do free schools, but they're usually far from it. They're just kind of co-opted the word. Although I do know some people who are trying to do this. Free schools meaning they're not part of the local district, and you still get local tax money to run your school. I know people who are trying to take advantage of this. If they're successful, I want to know, because we'd love to know about those precedents. In what type of space do schools usually start? Well, I'll tell you this. One of the things that a lot of our schools have found useful is starting in a church. Why? Because churches usually have Sunday schools. That means they're approved as schools. That is such an important thing, because one of the first things you'll run into when you try to start a school is local health and safety laws, fire laws, and so on. And so if you can find a building that is already approved for this, you are in much better shape than having to make a building become approved for this. So this is one of the things we found very useful. We'll talk about other ideas of spaces and different kinds of spaces that work in the course. Do you think there's a critical mass of children age ranges needed in order to make a democratic school function? What can individuals and schools do to support more widespread systematic change? Well, one thing that we've discovered, and this is not what all schools do, is that it tends to be a problem if you take new students over a certain age. 12 or 13, I think Summerhill has a limit around that age. One of the problems is that when a kid comes into an alternative school, they will sometimes be shot back to the emotional age where they stopped growing, and that could make them emotionally younger than some of the younger kids, and it could cause some real problems. And it might take them a long time to work through this, because the longer you've had a bad experience, the longer it might take you to overcome that experience and could have sort of decompress from it, detoxify. So that's one thing that I found is useful. It's also interesting, Brooklyn Free School started with about 35 kids. That seems like a good number if you can get to it, because you were able to have enough kids in each age level. It's hard if you're younger to do that, and I think it is important to try to do that. They have had enough people in a waiting list for a long time that they have been able to balance out genders and ages and keep them pretty balanced throughout the school. So it's good to try to do that if you can. However, it's also important for students to be able to operate across different age levels and find the things that they're interested in regardless of their age. What is the role of staff in a democratic school, and how can new staff develop their understanding of this role? Well, it's been my experience that if you have an alternative school, free school, in which you have non-compulsory class attendance, one of the best ways that teachers are trained is by students not going to their classes until they come up with stuff that is interesting for them. They get instant feedback. And the sad thing is you have tenured teachers that have taught for umpteen number of years that never got this feedback and never knew that they were boring, that they were not doing a good job getting through to kids and so on, because they had a captive audience. So that is what I found is the most powerful thing that I've seen for training staff people. And I used to think we were very lucky, and then I realized that by having long staff meetings every week, couple of long ones where we got things resolved, as well as, of course, the students' involvement. Teachers who were maybe not so good to begin with became good. Have you got some other? I have to look at my email. Okay, so I have to see if there's some new ones in there. How do you create an intentional culture of respect while balancing the needs of young people with more complicated learning differences such as severe Asperger's? You know, if you have a school that is non-authoritarian, you don't have the kind of scapegoating and bullying that you have in authoritarian schools, where it's usually somebody at the bottom. And it's actually absolutely amazing to me when I see how well kids treat each other and accept differences in democratic, free schools, alternative schools. Are there active models of group homeschooling and unschooling? Yes, there are a lot, and they're all over the place. I have already given you a few examples. One of them is North Star, which is in Massachusetts. Now, again, every state has different laws. So Massachusetts happens to be one that works really well for homeschooling and so on. In New York, you have to be more careful because theoretically, if you have more than 5 kids and you're teaching them more than 50% of the time, you have to call yourself a school. On the other hand, it's not that hard to become a school in New York. So how can you use democracy in your family? Well, you know, this is interesting. When we were raising my niece, I homeschooled her, and we had family meetings, even though there were only 2 or 3 of us. It's really it's actually more of the process that's important. In other words, in that process, you must listen to the other person, and you can't just cut them off and interrupt them. You must listen to them, and then you have to make a proposal. And then you have to discuss the proposal. And so by taking this process, it's amazing how this can defuse a lot of problems. And I've seen a lot of problems worked out with siblings in that way too. Okay, let me just see if there are some questions, in fact, if I can get to this, that have come in while we've been going through this. Meanwhile, I want to remind you, let's see here. Wow, we have lots of questions. I want to remind you that you can sign up for the course now. It's not too late. You can see on the page that you're looking at. And I don't think it's full yet, but we will stop at 25. Let's see what we have here. Will this course truly help me build the school online or offline? Well, no, I can't guarantee that. Of course, every situation is individual, but we certainly will do everything we can. And it's not just us, but the most important aspect of the course is the the peer involvement of other people who are starting alternatives. How does the school starter course apply to starting an alternative in rural settings? I would say there are more alternatives in rural settings than urban settings. It's interesting, and this seems to work. I don't know why, but it's not something that's more difficult at all. I think maybe because people can know you better and trust you more. Who knows? But that seems to be the case. Are any schools besides Albany Free School still taking up Jonathan Kozol's advice to run a profitable business to defray tuition? And if so, what business? Well, yes, there are some examples of that, and others are doing the same thing. It's very interesting. For example, Von Lara School started their home-based education program originally to kind of support their school, and it still does that. This is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And Highland School in West Virginia had people donate oil and gas wells to them that were somewhat depleted but still operable, so they could take a tax loss, and the school actually runs them to keep their rural school going. And now more and more people are working from home. And so that's interesting, because that's something that homeschoolers can do. They can have a home business and still be able to homeschool. That's very important to understand. Why do people think all charter schools are bad? My granddaughter is taking pre-calculus in 8th grade, and they don't do the stupid Common Core that is dumbing down. Well, the answer is that yes, it is theoretically possible to have a good charter school. Unfortunately, a lot of them have been co-opted and taken over, and it's a problem. It's a problem because corporations have kind of jumped in on this. I know the person who started one of the first charter schools, and his idea was to get rid of the red tape so people could really do something creative. And this is true in some cases. But unfortunately, right now, I can only count the number of really good charter schools on one hand. And we're hoping that there are about 5,000 of them. But no, it's certainly theoretically possible. It just becomes more and more difficult. But we certainly will help people who want to do it. We helped one person do it, started their school in Florida, and didn't even get through the year because the local district wouldn't give them the funding that was legally owed to them. So we will certainly help people who want to try to do that. Okay, so I was going to try to go through the little bit of the course. Let me see if I can figure out how to do this now. Some of the syllabus of the course. Let me see if I can remember how to do this. Let's try this and then go to, maybe this is it. Let's see. That's not it. We'll try again. And let's see. Oh, here it is. Oh, I had it. Okay, so what you see here is the map of the some of the schools that Arrow has helped to start. And it's quite amazing. You see that's the United States, but you also see them in Europe. You see them even in Australia and in South America and so on. So you can read about all this on the website. You'll be able to see it. You can also enroll. You see right there. You can just click on that to enroll, or you can do it on the thing you're watching. As far as I know, there are still openings. I don't actually know how many people have enrolled during the webinar. Last year, we filled it up during the webinar. These are the topics that we study in it. Different types of democratic schools and governance, clarifying your educational vision. What is your personal vision? And that will be discussed by other people in the group. Different kinds of governance. How do you, run your school? How do you run your board? All these things. Building a community around the idea of starting a school. Legal requirements of a school. It's a very, very important chapter, and we usually get guest speakers for that section. Finding or building a school environment. Financial basis for a school. fundraising, budgeting. We've talked a little bit about that tonight. We get into that in depth. Recruiting teachers and students, the first days of the school, and so on. So these are, and then if you go to the site, you'll be actually able to see the syllabus itself with the whole course description. Chris Macaliano is going to be the person helping me with the school. He wrote the book, How to Grow a School. And, you know, we got a couple other books that we use, but using the books is not crucial. And there's nothing that you must have. We will send you a couple of these books when you sign up for the course. Well, I think our hour is just about up. And if you want, you can email questions to me. I'm happy to answer them. You can actually call our number if you're in the United States, 516-621-2195. And we also do Skype and other things like that. So we're happy to communicate to you and reach out to you any way we can. Hope you've enjoyed this. We'd love to get your feedback. You know, this is only the second time we've ever done this. Maybe we should do some other things like this. Let us know. Anyway, I think we're done, and it's been a pleasure talking at you. And I hope you've enjoyed the webinar.